Welcome, friends, to a presentation on the Quaker Push for Gay Liberation, 1946 to 1973. I am Mark Bowman, Executive Director of the LGBTQ Religious Archives Network, the host of tonight's program. LGBTQ-RAN is a unique venture dedicated to preserving the history of LGBTQ religious movements around the world. LGBTQ-RAN is a digital enterprise. We are not a physical repository that stores papers. We advise and support leaders and groups in their efforts to preserve their records in appropriate archives. Furthermore, we collect and provide a treasure of historical information on our website about LGBTQ plus persons and groups from a wide array of religious expressions around the world. And finally, we encourage research and scholarship in queer religious history. Tonight, we will hear Heather White and Brian Blackmore discuss Brian's newly published To Hear and to Respond, the Quakers' Groundbreaking Push for Gay Liberation, 1946 to 1973. In this book, Blackmore tells the story of Quaker support for gay rights in the mid-20th century, as demonstrated through experiments in criminal justice reform, challenges to Christian moral codes, advocacy for the decriminalization of homosexuality, and efforts to institute attitudinal change both within and beyond the Quaker world. Quaker initiatives during this era included the first social service organization for gay people in the United States, the first public and positive statement on homosexuality from a religious perspective, and the first public statement on in support of bisexuality from a religious assembly. Contrary to the general assumption that religious groups were antagonistic toward LGBTQ persons at that time, Quakers were present at the Stonewall riots. They were instrumental in organizing the first pride parades in multiple major US cities, and they provided training, leadership, and support for a number of early gay rights organizations. Our presenters, first Brian T. Blackmore, Ph.D., is a community-based independent scholar who serves as the director of Quaker Engagement at the American Friends Service Committee. His writing about the role Quakers played in the gay rights movement can also be found in the Quaker World from Routledge in 2023. Brian currently serves on the board of directors for the Friends Historical Association and the status of LGBTIQ plus persons in the Professions Committee of the American Academy of Religion. Heather White, PhD, is a specialist in American religious history with a research focus on sexuality, gender, and 20th century social movements. Heather's first book, Reforming Sodom, Protestants and the Rise of Gay Rights, was published by the University of North Carolina Press in 2015, 10 years ago. Heather also co-edited an anthology titled Devotions and Desires, Histories of Religion and Sexuality in the 20th Century United States. Heather serves on the advisory board of the LGBTQ Religious Archives Network and is a steering committee member of the Queer Studies in Religion group of the American Academy of Religion. Now, I'm pleased to welcome Heather White and Brian Blackmore to begin this presentation.
Good evening, everyone.
And it's so awesome to see the names of there's a lot of familiar names there. There's a good number of friends. I welcome friends. So this is an exciting gathering to be part of. It's my pleasure today to interview Brian Blackmore about the newly published book, To Hear and Respond, the Quakers' Groundbreaking Push for Gay Liberation, 1946 through 1973. And I know Mark gave an overview of sort of the story of the book. I'm going to echo many of those things. So this book just came out this year from Brill Press. Thank you and congratulations, Brian. I know this project began when you were a PhD student in the religion department of Temple University, and there's the research is so helpful for this book. It just delves into angles into this history that a number of things that I knew sort of on one dimension, the focus on what was the story going on behind the scenes among the Religious Society of Friends, right? And the individuals involved just gave a much richer picture of many of those aspects of the stories. So I will say, again, this book examines the advocacy work by Quakers from the liberal tradition of the Religious Society of Friends in the mid-20th century, beginning, so in the mid-20th century, beginning of the movement for gay rights. Is my audio at all strange? It's good? Okay. I've got some sort of weird echo on my end, but I'm going to pretend that's not happening and just talk to y'all. So this is about the liberal tradition of the Religious Society of Friends and their involvement in the early beginnings of the movement for gay rights. And that list of involvement is impressive. The first social service organization for gay men in the United States, the first public and positive evaluation of homosexuality from a religious perspective, and the first public statement about bisexuality also from a religious perspective. So this book tells a detailed story of these and other related developments, tracing Quakers' early and important support for the emerging movement for gay rights from the years 1946 to 1973. So congratulations again, Brian. I'm interested in hearing just what got you started. What got you started on this project? Was there anything in particular that persuaded you as you were beginning that there was an important story to tell and focusing on Quakers and LGBT history?
Thank you, Heather, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight for this conversation. This project in this book was a labor of love that Heather actually had a little bit of a hand in encouraging. We first met each other when I was, a baby scholar and attending a program co-sponsored by the Human Rights Campaign and the Carpenter Center at Vanderbilt University. And it was for emerging scholars, young adults with an interest in studying religion at the intersections of gender and sexuality. I had no idea that I would embark upon, over a decade of research on the role that Quakers played in the advancement of the gay rights movement at that time. But Heather and many of the other scholars that operated that program encouraged me to pursue a career in this kind of work. And so I'm very honored and humbled that here we are today having this conversation between us. Things really got off the ground when it was just a few years after that program. I moved from my small town of Gainesville, Florida, to Chicago to begin a program at Chicago Theological Seminary, a Master's of Arts, and later a Master's of Sacred Theology. And I was coming out as gay to my family and to my friends, as well as coming out as Quaker. Both of those things happened somewhat simultaneously. And I don't think that's by accident or coincidence. There is something unique and similar about the experience of standing it out of a silent worship after sitting with other people for about 15 or 20 minutes of silence, feeling that kind of reverberation and nervousness and anxiety. Is what I'm about to say going to be accepted or respected by the people around me? And then mustering up the courage, standing up proud and delivering whatever truth has emerged from within yourself. That sequence of experiences well mirrors the experience of coming out as a queer person. And so, Quakerism is an experiential religion. And through this experiential learning about myself, I became curious about what the Quaker tradition had to say about LGBTIQ plus people. Growing up in the South, I was familiar with the violence and repression and antagonism inflicted by religious communities onto LGBTIQ plus people, and yet my experience with Quakers was contrary to that. I had always felt very welcomed and affirmed and appreciated and valued and celebrated. I, became obsessed with this pamphlet that was published in 1963 called Towards a Quaker View of Sex. It's the first public and positive evaluation of gay and lesbian sexuality from any religious group. Mind you, for friends on the call that haven't read the book, this pamphlet did not come from any official body of friends, any recognized kind of authority within the Quaker world. It was a group of young people who were students at Cambridge University who went to their Quaker elders and said, "Tell us what this tradition says about homosexuality." And those elders didn't know what to say in response, so they gathered together and held a series of monthly meetings to think deeply and to discern amongst themselves what the relationship was between Quakerism and lesbian and gay communities. As I'm learning about this, Mark Bowman, who just gave the opening remarks, was producing a virtual exhibit with the LGBT Religious Archives Network about Towards a Quaker View of Sex. I encourage friends on the call, if you haven't looked at that virtual exhibit yet, it's amazing, it's impressive, really well curated, and I offered some small contributions to making that exhibit possible. And that's really where things left for some time. I moved to Philadelphia from Chicago originally to begin a Ph.D. program with a dissertation focused on best practices for teaching about world religions at the intersections of gender and sexuality. I had been an educator for some time, and one of my master's theses was about best practices for teaching about world religions without that intersection in mind. And I really wanted to study under Rebecca Alpert at Temple because she had done some writing and exploration of best practices to do that work well. But there was this archive outside of Philadelphia, the Friends Historical Library at Swarthmore, and Heather knows what this is like. You just make an appointment and you have the coffee by your desk and you start letting your curiosity drift you into all kinds of dusty folders and boxes.
So you got archive fever.
Yeah. And here I am finding so many delightful interventions that Quakers have made to the advancement of gay liberation. And the more I shared this with my advisor and my other colleagues in the AAR, they said, "You got a gold mine, bud. You need to share this with the rest of the world." Dr. White Heather's book, Reforming Sodom, was another catalyst for me because, I'm thumbing through it for where are the Quakers? And they're mentioned in the chapter Scientia Sexualis about kind of these clinics used to help rehabilitate men who are being arrested for seeking out sex in public parks and movie theaters and subway toilets. Quakers being one of the groups that operated one of those clinics in the late 1940s. But there wasn't a lot of Quakers elsewhere in the book. And I wanted to find more. I thought, maybe I'll write the missing chapter. And the missing chapter ended up being 5 or 6 chapters that deserve the book on its own.
Right. Right. And man, there's nothing better than archives to open up information that you didn't even know to look for. Right. So the Toward a Quaker View of Sex and looking for, one of the major stories that I knew about, as you know, was a Quaker Readjustment Committee. Right. And the story that you're telling about so many of these things, again, just like brings in whole worlds that I didn't know about. So I'd love for you to tell us more about those research surprises, like those things that you discovered in the process that you didn't know in advance to look for. And I'm just going to say a name because there's one person I really, really, really want to make sure you get to, and that is Josiah Marvel. So you've got a lot more things to say, I know, but what were some of those surprises in the archive that really that shaped a story that you didn't know to look for?
So the first surprise was I thought it all began with Towards a Quaker View of Sex in 1963. A lot of these progress advancement narratives kind of begin with a small group that does something remarkable and valiant. Other groups and communities take interest in it. The movement kind of grows and swells, and we see more impactful, influential events, more shifting of attitudes within religious communities, within the wider society. So I imagined that the story was going to be kind of this swelling up of a wave, you know, and that the spark or the quake that began the wave was Towards a Quaker View of Sex. But that archive, it'll do things to you. And so, you know, using the finding guide, just Quakers and homosexuality, and here is these files about Josiah Marvel, who was the chairman of the Quaker Emergency Service in New York City, a organization similar to the American Friends Service Committee, or in the United Kingdom, Friends Service Council, which we know today as Quaker Peace and Social Witness, that wanted to do something meaningful during World War II that didn't involve conscription in military service. Quakers have had a historic religious conviction against war in the bearing of arms, and yet saw a nation in crisis and wanted to do something about it. And Marvel was a fascinating dude. He, you know, helped run some of the first STI clinics in the United States, and you know, would have these fundraisers with like Delacroix paintings and Picasso's, and he was assistant director of the ballet at one point. And he became close friends with some folks who were screening inductees into the military for homosexual proclivities. These were becoming the experts on homosexuality. And meanwhile, a court official also approached him and said, gosh, you know, year after year, we're sending what was once hundreds and now thousands of men to jail or labor camps for being a little naughty in public toilets and parks. And do you think that these like homosexuality experts you've been talking to over there could help us think of a different way? Is there something else that would be more compassionate or humane? In this clinic that they operated helped save thousands of men from having a criminal record that would have caused them to risk loss of employment, loss of housing, estrangement from their families, public humiliation. You know, I even wonder if some of the leaders of some of the early gay rights movements may have been treated or saved by the civilian readjustment clinic and able to live happy lives and careers because they didn't experience a more horrible end. And the clinic did a lot of amazing things, but at one point, Marvel himself was caught for soliciting sex in a public toilet. And the friends were so embarrassed. They were humiliated and decided to close the clinic forever. It had only been in operation for about 5 years. And Marvel became a recluse to his vacation home in Vermont, and soon after, tragically, took his own life. Um, and so this story in itself uh, creates a pattern for the larger narrative that I wanted to tell in the book, was that it's not an upward trajectory, and it's not progress and advancement all the time. We have triumphs, we take steps forward, but the fear and the shame, humiliation, repression is strong enough that we get knocked down and have to pick ourselves back up.
Mm.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I think I could repeat that story in other decades that I describe in the book, but I think that's a good moment to tell now.
And there are quite a number of, I mean, I'll just pick up on that theme of the sort of shame and embarrassment that was part of the larger groups around some of these courageous individuals, that right. So the nature of the pushback is something that you also highlight through this history as well. And I mean, there's a couple of places. Well, one place we could talk about next is the work that you do to bring Bayard Rustin, civil rights leader Bayard Rustin, into this story, and the story that on one level seems to be a kind of support from his fellow friends, right, other Quakers, and the story that was also really disappointing as a way of thinking about what that support could look like. I wonder if you could say more about what you learned about Bayard Rustin's life and his involvement, and what you also learned about sort of Quaker views about sexuality that come from highlighting that story as well.
Yeah. So Bayard Rustin is becoming more and more well known. Also, to tip the hat to the LGBT Religious Archives Network. I appreciate them for having a webinar like this not too recently with his partner later in life, Walter Nagel. And the movie, that the Obamas helped produce that you can watch on Netflix about his life. That movie illustrates some of the shame that was surrounding him after his arrest for having oral sex with two men in the back of a car in Pasadena, California, in 1953. But what that movie doesn't portray, or it doesn't identify some of the characters in the film, were Quakers. Rustin, I think, should be better recognized as a gay rights hero, not because he was openly gay during the organizing of the Million Man March and his contributions to the rise of the civil rights movement, but because long before that, in the late 1930s and throughout the 1940s, he was unabashed and open and flamboyant about his sexuality. He was not inclined to make much of a secret about it. His colleagues at the Fellowship of Reconciliation even talked about how much he would just bring his boyfriend around and they all knew him, and how much he wore his sexuality on his sleeve at a time when it was so dangerous. Again, how coming out as a Quaker, maybe it was something about the Quakerism that made him feel so strong and bold to do so. But when he was arrested, the pushback from the friends was pretty severe. He had been arrested before for his conscientious objection values and refusing to appear before a draft council, and the Quakers adored him for it. It's wonderful, like, good job, Bayard. And here, they cited, we had to fire Rustin from the Quaker organizations, quote, not because he was gay, but because he was promiscuously gay. And even the criticism of towards a Quaker view of sex that would come more than a decade later, Friends were less like concerned about the act of gay sex as being contradictory to Christian teachings or something that was written in the Bible. They were more preoccupied with the promiscuity in the gay world, and how much intimacy could be authentic between people that were having sex with multiple partners, meanwhile maintaining a committed relationship with one person. Um, Quakers have been misunderstood and by the wider public, and people have been suspicious of them for quite some time. Their religious convictions against war have raised suspicions that they might be disloyal to the United States and to our government. And I think that has developed a kind of anxiety in the Quaker world about always being seen in the right light, a kind of intention to maintain respectability. Could the peace movement endure if there were these depraved, promiscuous ones as their leaders?
I mean, this is a good point to talk a little bit more about the Quaker view of sex, right? Which one of the quotes that I highlighted from that, and we chatted about just earlier, was some of the concern with the folks who were working to put that pamphlet together, that readers would think, and I'll quote, that somehow Quaker families would create homosexual children in greater numbers. So part of it was addressing causality or ideological theories of homosexuality and figuring out what to make of them through a Quaker lens. But with that was also some worry about what it would look like for this pamphlet and this information coming from a group of Quakers to be out and available to the world. But I'd love to hear more about what really drew you as important to know about that story, especially from your understanding of the dynamics of those who were involved in the crafting of that statement. Like, how did the archive speak to you in a sense as you were working through the sources on that project?
Yeah. I mean, something I wanted to share with people that weren't familiar with Quaker tradition was that how unique the discernment process was amongst the authors who wrote towards a Quaker view of sex. Other historically Christian traditions have different authorities that they look to. Many Catholic and Protestant traditions and evangelical traditions will default to the Bible. Let's figure out what the text says, and that will reveal the truth. And other traditions will look to religious authorities, edicts, declarations that have been made by prophets or bishops or cardinals or popes to help guide the way. And the Quaker orientation is inward, to sit in silence and to listen deeply for what one's inward teacher might say. And so I think for queer Quakers, we encounter our own desires and our eroticism and all that stuff within, and our truth becomes known through that inward listening there. But for the authors of Towards a Quaker View of Sex, they had to listen inwardly and then listen to what each of them shared with each other as they spoke out of that silence, communicating their discoveries and their revelations with one another, and let those truths breathe and permeate for a long period of time. I mean, they gathered once a month for almost 2 years before they started writing Towards a Quaker View of Sex. The other story I love to tell is they would gather in a secret room in the women's club in London, and one of them describes it one of them says, it's like in all the movies where you had to like turn a book on the shelf and then like the door would open and so you can sense their kind of like sneakiness and like how excited they were and a little bit afraid to do that kind of work at that time.
Yep.
So that practice of quiet reflection, contemplation, and discernment, I think, was a really, really, really unique contribution. The other that I'll share, and there's more, is that Quakers have a unique relationship with gender, and we know that gender cannot be divorced from sexuality. Quakers were one of the first religious traditions in the Western speaking, English speaking, Christian dominant world to assert that women's preaching and authority was equal to men. And there was actually like laws enacted against the Quakers because of this this radical view of gender. There's also a really interesting figure, Jemima Wilkerson, who became the public universal friend in the 19th century when she had a vision of being visited by an angel and renounced gender and was like kind of an early non-binary ancestor. And so during World War II, gender is becoming understood and reinforced in a very new way, where real American masculine men go to war and real beautiful American women take care of the children and the family back home. And here were the Quakers refusing to go to war. And so that raised some suspicion that maybe Quakers were misguided or funny in their understanding of sexuality and what they were teaching their children. So that kind of like insistence on respectability, I think, was often in response to their worry and concern about how they were being perceived by others.
Yeah. And there's one of the things I want to pick up in what you just mentioned is that tradition of Quaker involvement in nonviolent resistance and in the anti-war movement also directly contributed to their connection to the first Pride demonstration the year after Stonewall. And that also was a piece. I've seen the fact of sort of Quaker involvement having, I've seen it mentioned in books about the history of Stonewall and especially the first Pride demonstration. But I'd love to hear more about what that involvement looked like. And if you know if there were other instances outside of New York where passive nonviolent resistance was part of what was brought to those early demonstrations.
Yeah, let me start with some interesting pieces that preceded Stonewall, because I think that was another surprise in my research, right? I thought Towards a Quaker View of Sex was going to be the spark that got things started. And then a lot of us that are early career historians think that Stonewall kind of like got things started. And so the first like instance of a Quaker organization having an interaction with a gay rights group actually was something that I didn't report in my book. It was Elaine Nichols. She writes in her book, Just Lucky, I guess, From Closet Lesbian to Radical Dyke, that she would help host Mattachine Society meetings at the Pasadena meeting in the late 1950s. I only learned that after my book had been published. But the one that is in the book is from 1965. Staff at the American Friends Service Committee would convene conversations between leaders of gay rights organizations, primarily Don Lucas of the Mattachine, and prison officials in the San Francisco Bay Area. And the Quaker staff were trying to impress upon these prison officials that gay people were being overly surveilled, hunted down, arrested, and incarcerated at rates that were unjust and inhumane. And the relationship became so strong that those Quaker staff actually were invited to like speak at Mattachine conferences. They helped form the Council on Religion and the Homosexual.
Right. Can you say more? Mattachine.
Mattachine, right.
Right. Say a little. There's a person who's unfamiliar with this name.
The Mattachine Society was a gay rights organization, bi-coastal at first. They were involved in education about the experiences of gay rights. They also served as kind of like a safe affinity space for gay people to learn about one another and to organize politically. And so it was Quaker commitments to peace that made them compelled to disrupt the violence of our prison and police enforcement systems in the United States. This was a form of structural violence that the Quakers sought to dismantle. So that was a really wonderful research finding to see Quaker activism for gay liberation happening before Stonewall. The report of Quakers being present at the Stonewall riots is very brief. It comes from Ed Tree, who was a bartender there, and he just says that the Quakers were there healing injured rioters. But the more interesting story was in organizing the first gay rights parade, the Christopher Street Liberation Day parade, the following year, which was meant to commemorate the events of Stonewall. The organizers were like a little nervous. They'd never done anything like this before. Like, what if the police show up with their billy clubs and start busting some heads? And what if there are bystanders start heckling or pushing people, or God forbid, something even more extreme or violent? And Quakers had done this nonviolent anti-war resistance during World War II, and they were, intimately involved in the civil rights movement. It was a Quaker organization that published Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail and sent him and his colleagues to India to learn about Gandhi's approach to nonviolence. They were well known by the left and these liberation movements. So they invited Quakers to teach the organizers of the first gay pride parade how to do nonviolent resistance well in case police or bystanders got out of hand. And so there was like a trust earned, and that evolved into gay rights organizations asking Quakers, could we rent some space from y'all? Quakers would even like offer financial resources to some of their projects. I just want to mention one more name before I turn back to you, Heather, that in LGBT history, we often get focused on the work of the Mattachine on the East and West Coasts, in DC and New York, in LA and in San Francisco. And there was a person who was two-time president of Mattachine Midwest, the Mattachine group in Chicago, who was a Quaker. His name was Jim Osgood. And he was the first Quaker to come out publicly in a Quaker magazine as gay. And he was a part of the hippie movement, and he was agitational and forceful in his prophetic voice against how awful police were treating queer communities in Chicago. Meanwhile, the Mattachine on the East and West Coast often was less inclined to be as in the public eye, as seen as so forcefully antagonistic.
Yeah. There's a couple of questions already in the chat, but there's two more that I'm gonna sort of put together that I want to hear a little bit more from you. And one of those questions is just to hear some, like, the context that this brings to the formation of the sort of the early caucus or identity-based movement within the Religious Society of Friends. So what does this larger history and what did your own work in the archives sort of teach you about how to understand that the formation of that advocacy formally, right, with among the Friends in the United States? And then another sort of layer to that question is I'm particularly interested if you have cases to highlight of places where those who are interested in especially trans and lesbian and maybe bisexual sort of examples. So examples other than or in addition to male homosexuality as part of that history. Were those voices part of some of that early organizing, and sort of how did this formation of the group within Quaker traditions take shape?
Yeah. I have two quotes that are kind of like coming up to the top of my mind, not by Quakers. They'll help frame my remarks to your first question. In one of Audre Lorde's poems, she says, you won't defend your city by shouting. And Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, the end of the movement is not the protest or the boycott. The end of the movement is redemption, reconciliation, and the building of the beloved community. I've met many activists, and I work for an activist and social justice organization now, who discount the power of community and how much you need community really to build a movement. You need to be amongst friends, capital and lowercase f, that you can trust, that you can stumble around and be lifted back up, that you can experiment with, that you can laugh with, that you can cry with. And so thus far, Heather and I have talked a bit about these kind of pockets of Quaker activism and advocacy, that clinic in New York, this little group in England that wrote this pamphlet, these like organizations in San Francisco and in Chicago, but we're talking about less than a dozen people at that point. When Quakers really start to make a difference was when queer Quakers had learned about one another and had started to gather and had developed kind of a cadence of meeting with one another during the summertime. That relationship building set the foundation for them to do some really meaningful political organizing. It was a group called the Committee of Concern, a name that came out of a stutter by one of their members when they were trying to reserve a room, and they didn't have a name quite yet. And so they were the Committee of Concern, later to become the Committee for Gay Concerns, for Lesbian and Gay Concerns, and today it's known as Friends for Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Concerns, FLGBTCQ. Many friends within the Quaker world lovingly call them the flippity gibbets. And it was this community that really helped the Quakers have trust in one another to do some great organizing. But the challenge with it often was a boys' club. And the voices of lesbian women were not always taken seriously, were not always amplified or centered. And so starting in 1977, about 5 or 6 years later after the formation of that group, Quaker lesbians formed their own affinity spaces, and they started a Quaker lesbian conference, both on the East and the West Coast, in the late 70s that existed through the 1990s. I have other projects that I want to get off the ground. I think the next one is going to be about Quaker involvement in the HIV/AIDS crisis, which paralleled their pursuit of same-sex marriage legislation. But a third project that I hope I will have the bandwidth and gift of long life to produce is about transgender Quakers. And the figure that I would love anyone on the call to take an interest in, her name was Roberta Dickinson. Roberta Dickinson was interviewed by Terry Gross on Fresh Air in 1977, where she described her transition and her experiences as a transgender Quaker. I mean, this kind of thing just did not happen in the late 70s. So she just had so much boldness and courage. And she was also an amazing artist and, illustrated her transition and shared it with friends. She would publish it in Friends Journal, the most widely read Quaker magazine. Another figure would be Sally Gross. She's a South African intersex activist. You'll see that Quakers have their discontents, and being supportive and celebratory and welcoming to transgender people has not manifested perfectly. In Britain Yearly Meeting right now, there's some hot debate about the inclusion of transgender people within their congregations. And there was a recent article in Friends Journal about the discomfort a polyamorous trio of friends had when they approached their community about taking a plural marriage under their care. So again, anytime I brag about the Quakers doing these remarkable things, I want it to be paired with my concerns about the setbacks and the inconsistencies and the breaks on progress and liberation.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'll say, as you've been talking, there's been a conversation in the chat about how so many of these figures need profiles in the LGBT Religious Archive Network. So thank you for saying their names, for lifting up their stories, and more research will happen to find out more about these folks. I'm going to ask another question, which draws from a panelist who was just curious to hear more about the particular tradition of Quakerism that you're highlighting in this story of LGBTQ acceptance. And I could sort of add to that question and say, like, not only the sort of where in the tradition or where among the subgroups of Quakers would you locate them, but also how would you sort of identify important aspects of that tradition that has maybe helped to spark that history or that involvement in LGBTQ support.
Yeah, wonderful. And you're giving me an opportunity to share some things that didn't get included in the book, which I loved. Quakers are a small religious tradition. There are estimates that there are only about 300,000 Quakers worldwide. And folks who are unfamiliar with the Quaker tradition might be surprised to learn that there are 3 times as many Quakers in Kenya as there are in the United States and the United Kingdom combined. And these friends in Kenya, and also through most of Latin America, but also parts of the United States and the United Kingdom, are known as evangelical Quakers. Evangelical Quakers practice a form of worship that resembles what you might see in a Protestant tradition, like a Methodist church. They have hymns, there's a pastor who gives a sermon, there may be a collection plate that is passed around, there might be a choir. The evangelical Quaker tradition, however, is the youngest of the 3 major branches of Quakerism. It started in the 19th century when Quakers were becoming interested in how their neighbors were worshiping and started to adopt some of their practices in the United States. And it was those Quakers in the United States who sent missionaries to Africa and to Latin America and other parts of the global South in the Middle East seeking to evangelize and convert more Quakers to their tradition. The liberal Quaker tradition and the conservative Quaker tradition believe that they are in the direct descendancy of the 17th century Quakers who practice a quiet, contemplative form of worship where there are no pastors. We say we abolish the laity. We are all ministers to one another. Everyone has the responsibility of ministry. So out of that sitting silence, anyone is given the opportunity to share a message and speak. The differences between liberal and conservative Quakers is that conservative Quakers will place more emphasis on the teachings of the Bible and the role that Jesus plays in their salvation, that the crucifixion and the resurrection of Jesus has an influence and impact and a reality upon the journey of the soul, while liberal Quakers might seek other points of reference, such as the inner light, the inward teacher that is within. And there are even many liberal Quakers who identify as atheist, agnostic, or humanist. There's actually a figure in this book. His name is Dan Seeger. He was the clerk of the Committee on Homosexuality for New York Yearly Meeting, who wrote the first statement from a Quaker group in support of gay rights from an official Quaker entity. Dan Seeger is known for his Supreme Court trial, where he convinced the U.S. government to expand the definition of what it means to be a conscientious objector, to also include people who are atheists and agnostic like himself, that you did not need to have a belief in God in order to be a person of faith. So there's great theological diversity in the Quaker world. In 2012, evangelical Quakers released a public statement saying that homosexuality was a vile behavior that was inconsistent with Christian teachings. So Quakerism globally is not in the majority affirming, welcoming, and supportive of LGBTIQ plus people. The thing that didn't get into the book that I did want to mention is some of the ancestry behind this attention to the inward teacher rather than the Bible that exists in that liberal stream of Quakerism. There was a great schism in Quaker history between the Hicksites and the Orthodox. And to summarize it kind of clumsily, they were arguing about, well, if you sit in silence and you hear something, and that something contradicts the Bible, what do? The Orthodox said, oh, no, you must be mistaken. This must be your ego. This must be some agenda that you have that could not have been a message from God or a transcendent reality. And the Hicksites said, no, truth is constantly unfolding. It's becoming known more and more and more. And the Bible revealed a truth for a time, and we are encountering more truth as humanity progresses. The name of the Hicksite movement is after Elias Hicks, who was a great friend of Walt Whitman. Walt Whitman even had a bust of Hicks in his library. And at one point, Elias Hicks gives this sermon called Let Brotherly Love Continue. I can't help but wonder if there was some innuendo in that name of that sermon. In this sermon, he preaches that our desires and propensities are given by God. They are meant to be instructive. And so that may have been one of these motivators for the Friends in the 20th century to stand in the vanguard of gay rights. I'd like to I think we're about to close very soon, and there's a quote at the beginning of my book that mirrors some of what Hicks said once upon a time, and it's where the title of the book comes from. And the quote is by Mary Calderon, who worked with Dan Seeger on that committee on homosexuality. Calderon was also one of the first medical directors for Planned Parenthood. She founded an organization about sex education that was employed by the United States government. And she said this: "It is as simple as a syllogism, that there is that of God in every human. And because sexuality is an innate part of the human being, then there must surely be that of God in human sexuality." We can hear some of Hicks talking about those desires and propensities, right? She goes on, "The great challenge of being a friend has always been for me that only one of us may hear, each one for his or her own self, God speaking to us. No other human being can overhear these messages, nor our response to them, nor can any other human being respond to them on our behalf. And so a double burden is laid on each one of us alone to hear and to respond."
Thank you so much, Brian, for that. I mean, I love that we came full circle to the title. So the Hicksite tradition as an animating sort of spark that may have been one thing that was really part of what fueled that involvement in early LGBTQ rights. Thank you so much. I will add that there was a question in the chat from Jim about bisexuality and Bob Martin's role in it. We don't have time to get to that, but it is in the book. There's a discussion in the book. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to hand this over to Mark, who will wrap it up.
Thank you. Wow, so much, Brian and Heather, for this fascinating and inspiring program. Thanks to all of you who participated, offered your encouragement, your comments, and your questions. Within a few days, you will all receive an email with a link to the recording of tonight's program that you can share with friends and colleagues. If you're interested in more opportunities to explore the history of queer religious movements, check out the LGBTQ Red website, and particularly our events page. There you will find announcements of future online programs, as well as recordings of past presentations. Our next online event will be our Holy Troublemakers Gala on October 19th. This will be a glorious online celebration of LGBTQ plus religious history. We will honor 5 holy troublemakers from our past: Imam Dai Abdullah, Reverend Brent Hawks, Nancy E. Crody, Reverend Rita Ramos, and Reverend Dr. Aaron Swenson. We'll also recognize some holy troublemakers today, as well as honor those among us who have completed their earthly journeys this past year. Please sign up now to join us on October 19th. In closing, I remind you that LGBTQ RAN is the first and foremost source of information on LGBTQ plus religious history. We're a very small operation that is funded through the generosity of friends like you. So if you would like to see more programs like this one, and if you share our commitment to ensure that future generations will hear our voices and stories, please help make this happen with your gift. You can either go to giveq.org, that's just giveq.org, on your phone, tablet, or laptop, or click on the donate button on the LGBTQ RAN homepage. With your credit card in hand, it only takes a couple of minutes to make a gift, and your gift does make a difference. On behalf of everyone here, I offer much gratitude to Brian and Heather for their enlightening presentation. Good night to all.